and it's going to be POP utilities, the system setup, systems and parameters. Okay, so here we are in Sage 200. We have our purchase order list view on the screen in front of us, and the first thing we're going to be doing is within purchase order processing, going into POP utilities, system setup, and we're going to go into POP settings and have a little look at all the options available. The first screen is our document numbering. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's asking us if we want to automatically generate our purchase order and return numbers, and if we do, what is the next order number we want to be using and the next return number we want to be using. It's purely user preference. There's no right or wrong way as to if you want them generated or not. The system also generates goods received numbers, so it's just asking you what is the next goods received number that you want to be recorded, and it'll increment these numbers by one every time a GRN is created. And then the final option on this screen is, do we want to display the outstanding order quantities during goods received entry? So when we're doing our goods received in purchase order processing, do we want the user to be able to see what we're expecting to receive, or do you want that blanked out so they just type in what they've received with no visibility of what's actually outstanding? On our order entry screen, this is all to do really with generating purchase orders. So what we want to include in order generation, what orders we want to generate purchase orders for back-to-back and direct delivery sales orders. Do we want to generate separate purchase orders for direct delivery sales orders? And also about allowing order entry for goods to be delivered direct from the supplier. Now, all of those are covered in the notes that I mentioned, generating purchase orders, but as I say, that was a separate webinar a few months ago, so I won't actually be covering the generation of automatic generation of purchase orders in this session. The bottom half of this screen, however, has got sort of more information. It's asking about analysis codes. Now, analysis codes can be stored against the purchase order header itself or against each individual order line. And what it's asking us here, are we allowing the user to amend the analysis codes on the order header, and are we allowing them to amend analysis codes on each individual line? It could be that they have to accept the default and we don't want them to be amending any analysis codes. The same is true of our nominal codes. There will be a default nominal code when we generate our purchase order based on the stock item if we're purchasing stock items, or a default from the supplier code if we're purchasing text items. And we'll look at that in just a moment. It's also asking about the order originator. Now, with regards to purchase order authorization, the rules are all based on who actually originated the order, not who actually typed the order in. So this is saying by default we will say that the user that's actually typing the purchase order in will be the originator, and that can be changed on a case-by-case basis. In the default accounts, now this is where we define where the default nominal code comes from. So it's saying here we have the choice, use the same nominal code as the supplier account, or use the nominal code that is generated from the stock item account. As I say, if we had it set to stock item account, which we have here, if we're purchasing stock items, then obviously that's where this default nominal code will be generated from. But if we're purchasing anything else, like a text item, then it can't get that information from the stock code, so it will revert to the supplier account default nominal code for that purchase order line. For those of you that use cost centers and departments, this is asking if we want to default as well the cost center and department to the same cost center and department as the supplier account. So in other words, if we're purchasing a stock item for which the nominal code is nominal code 123, but on the supplier account we have the default nominal code as nominal code 456, but with a cost center 1 and a department 2, then department 1, cost center 1 and department 2 will be included in the default nominal code for that particular purchase order line. It's also asking for the nominal code for standard cost variances. We have a number of different costing methods within stock control, one of which being standard cost. Now, when we purchase items through purchase order processing, we may be paying our supplier £10, but our standard cost on a stock item may be £12, so there's a £2 difference between those costing methods, and there's a routine to be run which I covered last month in the stock costing webinar to actually post those standard cost variances through to the nominal. And again, do we want these standard cost variances to be split by cost center department depending on the settings we have within the nominal ledger and our nominal structure? Order processing. This is asking us, first of all, if we want to record receipts prior to invoicing for text order lines and service and labour lines. There's a number of options. First of all, if you want to receive goods for your text order lines, then we have these three choices. We can choose to confirm them with goods received. So in other words, when we're receiving goods against a purchase order, we would see both the stock lines and the text lines, and we can receive them all within the one option. Alternatively, there's another option within order processing to confirm text lines in a separate program. So we would have to receive all stock lines through goods received, and we would receive our text lines as a separate option in confirm service and free text lines. Finally, we have the option that we don't require confirmation for text order lines. No right or wrong. My preference personally is I like to confirm with the goods received, because you just go into the one option within purchase order processing and you see everything on a purchase order and you can receive them all at the same time. A separate option, I say, does exist, or confirmation is sometimes not required. So if you're purchasing, we'll say, I don't know, like an insurance, you've raised a purchase order for car insurance, you don't have to go through that confirmation required process. You can record the invoice directly against the purchase order, and it will complete that purchase order at that point in time. This is just the default, okay? So if I were to say that we want to include with goods received, there's an option now, do we want to include our text order lines in our accruals? If, however, I said it's not required, yes, I'll continue, then we don't have that option. So you have to include text lines in the accruals, you have to have gone through that goods received process, otherwise it doesn't know how to measure them. The same options are true for your service and labour lines as well. So again, you can confirm with goods received and include those items in your accruals. You can confirm them as a separate option within order processing, and again, they can be included in accruals, or you can choose to not confirm receipts, and hence they will not be included in your accruals at all. This is just a default and it can be changed on a line-by-line basis on each purchase order. Update stock cost prices. I have included some notes on this. It explains how this all works and the differences between the two options. You can choose to give the user the option to allow prices to be updated when goods are received. By default, that's not ticked. So goods prices will be updated when the invoice is received for the goods and not when the goods are received themselves. So what we're saying is that we're allowing the user to choose that they can update prices when goods are received. By default, we are saying that we want the goods, the prices be updated at point of goods received, or we could change that and say, well, actually, the default is when the invoice is recorded, and the user can change that if they choose to do so. If we are going to update prices when goods are received, there may well be a difference between our order price and our invoice price. And if that occurs, then this nominal code is where the difference between those costs will be posted. We can also choose when the exchange rate is going to be used, and is that at the point of the order or at the point when we're updating the prices, so i.e. when we're doing the goods received or when we're doing the invoice received. Match, we'll have a look at some examples of those during the course of this morning's session. Match invoices and credit notes to, you have a choice to literally just, when you put your invoice on, just say, I'm receiving the invoice for this particular order. Okay, I can't change that, that's fine. And that would be when that particular option is ticked. What most people do is they would go through the goods received process, and then when they're matching the invoice against the order, they would also match it against the goods received note that's been booked in through the goods received process. As you saw there, once you've got started processing, you can't change that setting if there are any live orders on the system. You would need to complete your orders and then change that setting. Cancelled orders. Oh, sorry, use disputed invoice processing. I've got that ticked on, and I'm going to be showing you again throughout the course of the morning how that works and how the disputed invoices can actually be processed and completed. When we're cancelling orders, do we wish to record details of cancelled orders for future analysis? I'm usually inclined to switch that on. There's no need not to have visibility of your cancelled orders, but it's entirely up to you and how you want to process. And then when it comes to purchase order authorization, do we want to allow the processing of unauthorized orders? Personally, I think that if you're using order authorization, you wouldn't want to allow processing if it hadn't been authorized, but you do have the ability to switch that on so that you can go through that order process and backdate the order authorization. Finally, when it comes to our printing tab, we have the option to automatically print copy orders. What this will do, it won't stop you going to print the order in your format that you use currently, but it will automatically spool a report that just says a purchase order has been generated. And for those of you that need to do intrastat declarations, this is where we define that you want to generate the intrastat entries for your purchase order. We define if you want to include the terms of delivery on the intrastat and what the default terms and the default nature of the transaction are for your transactions. These can obviously be overwritten on a transaction by transaction basis. You see here we have as well include entries based on either the receipt date or the invoice date. Now, if you notice that's greyed out, you have that option to choose the date you want to base your entries on, but as soon as you've generated your first intrastat declaration, you cannot then change that. That's then written in stone, and you have to live with the choices that you've made. Okie dokes. So while we're in system setup, I want to have a little look at maintain authorization rules. I have got some handouts on there for you to print out, and it will talk you through the purchase order authorization process. And it's through the system setup that you define the authorization rules. Now, authorization rules can be based on the value of a purchase order. It can be generated based on who has originated an order, and it can also be based on teams or groups of people and projects. For those who are using project accounting, you can work on project managers as well. So let's have a little look at our rules. If I edit this one, what we're saying is that any order that's greater than zero but less than £1,000, it doesn't matter who has originated that particular order, but it's Lee Jones who is the authorizer. I have another rule that says, again, anything now that's greater than £1,000, but is greater than, and that's infinity in effect, so it's anything that's greater than £1,000. Again, it doesn't matter who originated it, but it's Gary Morgan that needs to authorize that particular purchase order. Finally, we have the option here that, again, if the value is greater than £1,000, then if Andrew or Ash have originated that particular order, then Suzanne has to authorize it. Now, if you notice, we have these rule groups here. This is group number 1, whereas the other groups were groups number 2. And that means that we can have multiple signatories for the same purchase order. So what I mean by that, I'm going to just do a test here, and I'm going to say, right, if the value is £500 and the originator, I will say, is Adam, okay, then Lee needs to authorize that. If the value is £1,500 and the originator is Adam, then it's only Gary that needs to authorize that. However, if it's greater than £1,500 and Ash were to generate that particular order, then there are 2 signatories required for that particular purchase order. Both Gary and Suzanne would need to authorize that particular purchase order. Now, what I want to show you as well on our purchase order list here, if you do use purchase order authorization, it's really useful to add the column Authorization Status. I'm just going to move that over a little bit so we have full visibility. If you see here, we have these options that it's not authorized, it's authorized, or not required. So you can see at a glance when you're looking at your purchase orders what the authorization status is for those particular orders. Not required means that it doesn't meet any of the criteria required for the authorization process. Not authorized means that it's still waiting to be authorized by the authorizer, and authorized means it's ready to be fully processed. To authorize purchase orders, that is done through order processing. And we have the first option there, authorize orders. Now I can see all the orders here because if you notice on the bottom left-hand corner we have this include super authorizer orders. I am a super authorizer, and that is defined for roles or individuals within their settings. So they just have access to the super authorizer feature within their feature options. And to authorize an order, you just highlight it. You can view an order, you can put it on query, or you can just choose to authorize that particular order. There's also email notification available as well. So when anybody raises a purchase order, an email can be fired off to the person that's required to authorize that order. That email can be opened up remotely, and then also a link can be set up so that purchase order can be viewed and it can be authorized without the user having to log on to Sage 200. So a very useful feature for those that are out and about on sites, but they're needing to authorize and view purchase orders. Now as well, what we have available to us is Authorization Out of Office. So if I'm going on holiday, I can say, well, in my absence, I want Adam to authorize my orders. And also we have a maintain alternative authorizers. And what this is allowing is another user to define an alternative authority in my absence. So if I'm away, I can say, right, well, I can say, well, if Andrew is away, then the alternative authorizer would be Charlotte. So it's very, very well managed. You know, you shouldn't be in a situation where purchase orders can't be authorized because you will have super authorizers. You can set your own alternative authorizers, and other people can set alternative authorizers in your absence. Okay. Now within our purchase order maintenance screens, we have a number of options. We have additional charges, so you can set up all sorts of delivery charges that can be included on your purchase orders. They tend to be used for delivery, and if I were to just edit one, you can see the information that we hold with regard to additional charges. You can assign a code and a name. You can assign a default VAT rate. You can define a default charge, so maybe £10, and you can also define a default nominal code. So if I were to just go down to sorry about this, I can't find my nominal code, so I may just stick it to suspense. All right, so that will default. When we raise a new purchase order, we can add these additional charges and those items will default. You can also set up disputed invoice codes. So we can add any number of codes and they are purely what's meaningful to you. So maybe we could have P for a price discrepancy. Do we want to allow invoices and credit discrepancies to be written off? So that's just a tick box when we use the write-off option. We can add maybe a Q for a quantity discrepancy. Okay. And so on and so forth. So you would devise your own list of disputed codes. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new purchase order, and we're going to look at some of those settings and how they reflect when we're actually processing our purchase orders. So from my purchase order list, I'm going to create a new purchase order. I'm just going to select a supplier, and it's warning me here that the supplier account balance has exceeded the set credit limit, but it's not going to stop me processing. It's just a warning to the user that we are spending perhaps a little too much with this particular supplier. By default, I'm going to supply to my home location. We have a document date, we can request a delivery date, and we can record supplier reference. Okay. So first of all, on my delivery and invoicing tab, you can see here that we have the analysis codes. And this is where we've defined that we are allowing the user to actually amend those, that particular analysis code for our buyer. Whereas in the purchasing area, that's not amendable. We've defined in the analysis codes that that is set purely as the default pulled through from the supplier account. And I'll show you that setting in the analysis codes in just a moment. Let's start adding items. So I'm going to add a standard item, and I'm going to select our webinar item. Okie dokes. So first of all, I'm not going to go through every field. It's assumed that you have a working knowledge of purchase order processing. I'm literally just going to focus on those settings that we've just discussed. So here we have that prompt to update prices when goods are received. By default, that is ticked on because we ticked it on within our settings. However, we do still have the option to untick that, which means it will then be updated when the invoice is received. But I'm going to leave that switched on for now. The quantity that we want to purchase, the price we're expecting to pay, and any discount associated with that as well. The nominal code has been pulled through from our stock item because that's what we defined within our settings. And if the supplier had a cost center or department associated with it, we would also see that cost center department pulled through to our default nominal code. I'm also going to add a free text line with a quantity and a price of £10. Okay. And here we have the option to change the confirmation method. So by default, we're saying confirmation is not required for this item because that's what we put in our settings. But for each text line I enter, I could change my mind and say, well, in this instance, I do want to do the confirmation with the goods received or confirm as a separate option. But again, I'm going to leave it as confirmation not required as per our settings. If I add an additional charge, I would see all the additional charges that we created within our POP maintenance screens. And if I select our delivery, it's pulled through the description, it's pulled through the VAT rate, it's pulled through the net value, but I could change that, so maybe I'm going to be charged £12 in this instance, and it's pulled through my default nominal code, which I just set to suspense. Okay, so we're starting to see how those settings are affecting and changing the way that the order process takes place. So if I save our order, again we get that message that the supplier account balance has exceeded the credit limit, just as a warning, but I'm going to say OK to that and OK to that. It's generated our purchase order number based on our settings. And if I just refresh my list view here, that's the purchase order that we've just generated this morning. And if you notice, our authorization status is not authorized because we haven't been through the authorization process, and it meets one of the criteria to say that it requires authorization. Now within authorization as well, if I go to order processing, there are, as well as our authorized orders, you have my unauthorized purchase orders, which is a workspace. So if I were to select that as a user, what I would see here are all the purchase orders that I have to authorize, that are available to me to authorize. And by highlighting any of those orders, I can see the items on the bottom half of the screen, and I can choose order item. to authorize my action selector. Oopsie, sorry, I've gone a bit wrong there. But I should be able to authorize the order from there as well. Actions, oh, I can't do it. Anyway, you can see them there. You should be able to authorize them. I'm not quite sure how to do that. I do apologize. So going back to my authorize orders screen, okay, that's the order we've just generated, and I'm going to authorize that order. Okay, so by refreshing my list, I can now see that that order is authorized and ready to be processed. I'm going to go back to order processing. The print orders option, you don't have to have printed orders to actually process goods received or invoices received, but obviously you would want to process your print an order to send out to your suppliers. Purchase orders can be amended to have your branding, your logo on them, and they can also be emailed directly out to your suppliers. Okay, I'm now going to go to my goods received, and if I go to confirm goods received, and I were to select that supplier, I see all the orders that are waiting to be received from that particular supplier. That's the order we've just generated this morning. And if I say OK to that, if you notice, the only item that I have visibility of that I need to receive the goods for is this particular line here, which is our webinar item, our stock item. The text item, we said we didn't want to go through the confirmation process, so that's not showing on this screen. And we don't receive, by default, we don't receive additional items. That's assumed that it's going to be received. I'm just going to enter a GRN number, a GRN date, okay, and just confirm that we've received that particular item. So I'm now going to save that item. Okay, what I'm going to do now though is I just want to go into stock control because we had that setting to update stock at the goods received. So when I now go into stock control on my stock valuation report, I do my valuation for that particular item. Okay, we can see that it's included in our, it's a confirmed item. Okay, so the quantity there is 1. It's got a confirmed price, which is our purchase order price. So it's £100, which is our purchase order price, our confirmed value. It is not unconfirmed at this point. Well, it never will be unconfirmed because we're always going to confirm at the point of goods received. And if I just go and have a little look at the stock transactions for that item, so if I go to view history, okay, and show details, you'll see here that when we received the goods in, it's been costed at that point in time. The unit cost is £100. If we have the setting to update the prices at the invoice received, the unit cost price for our goods in would be nothing, and it is at the point of the invoice received that the unit cost would then be assigned to that stock item. It is recommended that if you're using the average costing method, then you select update prices when goods are received. It just makes sure that your average price is up to date, so that there's no time lag between receiving the invoice and your average buying price. Okie dokie. Additional charges. So what I'm going to do now is actually process an invoice for that particular order. So again, if I just go to my purchase order list, and if I go to order processing, and I'm going to record the purchase invoice. Again, we select the supplier that we're receiving the invoice from, and we see all the outstanding orders for that particular supplier. There's our order that we've generated this morning. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to enter my invoice details. So my invoice date, the invoice number. Okay, we can check to make sure that hasn't previously been entered. And now what I'm going to do is match the items on our purchase order against our invoice. So here we have our stock item. Okay, so as soon as I select that, at the bottom half of the screen here now is asking me to match it against the GRN for this item, and I can see the GRN that we've booked in earlier on. Our text line, okay, there is no GRN, so we don't have to match that, and the same is true for our additional delivery charge. Now, at the bottom of the screen here, this is where we choose to put an invoice on dispute if there is an issue. If I select Dispute Invoice, I select the dispute code, and we see the drop-down list of codes that we set up within the POP maintenance. So maybe there's a price discrepancy. So wrong price. Okay. Now what that will have done is just recorded the invoice within Sage 200, but it has not posted that invoice through to the supplier account, and also it hasn't really matched it against the purchase order until we choose to post that particular invoice. And what I mean by that is if I look at this purchase order, and if I show quantities, it's telling me the quantity on order, it's telling me the quantity received, but my invoice quantity is still 0, even though we've put that particular invoice on, but it's on dispute. To resolve your disputed invoice, there's a separate option here, Disputed Invoices, which if I were to go into that, and this would need to be managed on a weekly or monthly basis, however often you choose to do so, or when you have the conversation with your suppliers. So by going to Disputed Invoices, it will show you all the invoices that you have on dispute. And what you can do is look at the dispute details, so you have all the information available to you. Now at the bottom of the screen here, we have these 4 different options. We could choose to accept and post the details. So in other words, we think, well, no, actually it's fine. After all, we just accept it, and that will post it through to the supplier account and also to complete the matching against the purchase order. You could choose to edit the matched invoice. So in other words, we could go into that and change the price. That would then allow us to post it through with the amended price through to the supplier account and complete the matching process in purchase order processing. It could be that you want to resolve with a credit note. And so what you would do is you would post both this invoice through to the supplier account plus a matching credit note to resolve that issue. And finally, you can choose to delete the invoice completely while you're just waiting for a new invoice to come in from your supplier. So let's have a little look at some of these. So if I go into edit the matched invoice, okie dokie, this is exactly what I see. So I've got the order details on there, or my invoice details, and I can just choose to accept and post it. What else could I choose to do? Why have I got all the items on here? There they are. Okay, it's listed all the outstanding purchase orders. So what I can do here is I can now change the price, I can change the quantity for any of those items, and I could choose to accept now and post that through to the supplier account. I could choose to resolve with a credit note. Okay. Oh, if I highlight it first. Okay. It's telling me here that after I've posted the credit note, I'm presented with the original invoice, which I must also process. So in other words, it's going to process both an invoice and a credit note for this particular transaction. I'm going to say, yes, I want to continue. So I now see all the items that will be on my credit note. I can change the credit note date. I can pop in a reference, so maybe credit note 321. Okie dokie. And I can then post my credit amounts. That will then, I could enter credit amounts as well, so I can actually change any of those details. So maybe I'm getting a partial credit, and I can enter the details here as opposed to having a full credit for that invoice. I can then choose to post the credit amount and then post my invoice. If I accept and post it, that will literally just take me through to that posting screen, and it will post that invoice through. And as I said, delete invoice will just remove it completely from the system as though it's never been recorded. So what I'm going to do, rather than that, I will resolve with the credit note, because that's the most complex one, so you can see those details being processed. So yes, I want to continue. Enter my reference, my credit note 321. Okie dokie. I'm happy with those amounts, but if I wanted to enter the credit amounts, I could say actually the quantity to be credited is 1, but I'm not getting a £10 credit, I'm getting a £5 credit for that, and OK to that. Now if I post my credit amounts, OK, it's taken me through to my credit note screen, which I can then save, and it's now taken me straight through to my invoice screen, which again I can save. So now if we have a little look at that purchase order, we can see that everything has been invoiced, okay, but we've got a credit note which I'll show you in just a moment. So it's completed our purchase order. And if I look at the supplier account, the transactions, okay, we have there our credit note for the £12, which is what I entered, and we have our invoice going through as well for the original value. Okay, so a number of options there for your disputed invoices. If you want to, you can also dispute credit notes, but I'm not sure that there's much call for that. Okay, so I just want to show you a little bit about analysis codes, because they're pulled through from a number of places for your purchase order process, and they can enhance the reporting and the analysis that you can do within Sage 200. Within Accounting System Manager and our settings, this is where we define our analysis codes, and we define analysis codes for all modules. So this is a long list of analysis codes that can be used within sales ledger, purchase order processing, throughout the system, and now in stock control as well. So we have here the analysis code, and we define if we allow the user to enter free text, and if we allow them to enter a new value while they're sort of on the fly, so while they're actually processing the transaction. So let's create a new code, and I'm going to call this just POP analysis. I'm going to say no, we don't allow the user to enter free text, but we will allow the user to enter a new value on the fly. And then the values, the drop-down list we have available to them, I'm going to have just A, B, C, and D. Okay, you can set a default value as well, which will pull through automatically when you process this particular analysis code. So I've defined in Sage 200 as a whole that there is an analysis code called POP analysis. And within the purchase ledger and the setup, I'm going to maintain analysis codes. And I'm going to say, right, we also want to use the analysis code POP analysis. Okay, we can change the label if we want to for our purchase ledger. So if that's called region, for example, you could have an analysis code that's called region. Then in the purchase ledger, it's called purchase region. In the sales ledger, it's called sales region. You can also choose to make an analysis code mandatory, but to do that, you must have set a default value within that drop-down list that we set up just now. If I now go and have a little look at a supplier, so if I just go to a supplier list, call up AB Cookers and amend that account, within my trading tab, I now have the analysis code, POP analysis, and I can populate that with one of my codes, but I could also add a new value if I wanted to. I can say this value E, and OK. So not only is E relevant for this particular supplier, but it's now available as an additional drop-down selection. Within purchase order processing and POP maintenance, we have analysis codes, maintain analysis codes here. And this is where I can define that I want to use that POP analysis. Again, I could give it a different label and I could make it mandatory. But I have an edit button at the bottom of the screen here, which I want to go into. And this is where I can define more specifically the details for this particular code. Get it that. Oh, where's it gone? I've lost it. So I apologise. It's gone behind a screen somewhere. Right, okay, I seem to have jammed myself up here, so I do apologise. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into a different system of Sage 200 to show you and complete that demonstration. So I'm just going to go to 200 now onto my laptop and just load up the analysis options there. While we're waiting for that just to load up, as I say, this is an ideal opportunity maybe for you to download those handouts, the 3 handouts available to you on POP authorization, generating purchase orders, and updating the stock cost prices. Times like this, you wish it was a bit quicker to load up. There we are, we're just about there. And the survey. Okie doke. So I'm going to go straight into purchase order processing and POP maintenance and maintain analysis codes. It's still loading up. Okay, I'm just going to edit one of our existing analysis codes, and this is what I was trying to show you earlier on. Okay, do we want to allow this analysis code to be amended for each order and return? Do we want to get the default value from a supplier code? So in the example I was just looking at where we had that POP analysis, it was set up as within the suppliers, and I can say, right, get the default from wherever I want it to be. So when I raise a purchase order, the default value for that analysis will come from the supplier code, but I'm allowing that code to be amended. I can also push that analysis code forward into the stock item history, so for the transaction. So I can say, when I've purchased this particular item, on the stock movement history screen, I want to be able to see that analysis code in this particular analysis code on that stock item. Okay, so as well as reading information from the supplier, it can feed it through to the stock transaction as well. Okay, so that brings us really to the end of what I wanted to show you this morning. So sorry for that little hiccup at the end there, but just as a little recap. So what we've discussed, we've been through our POP utilities and the system setup. We've looked at the POP settings. We've had a little look at the maintenance of authorization rules, additional charges, disputed invoices, and analysis codes. We've had a little look at the recording receipts prior to invoicing for text lines, so we didn't have to receive those items in for text. One thing I will just point out, within order processing, this is where we go through, if you had the separate options that you wanted to receive them separately, your stock items would be received through goods received, confirm goods received through this option here, and service and free text lines can be received as a separate option to confirm service and free text received. We've also had to look at the differences between updating stock cost prices at the point of invoice received as opposed to when the goods are received. And just to summarise that, sort of the difference is really that when you update the stock cost prices when goods are received, when the goods are received, goods are marked as confirmed. The stock is included in the stock valuation report in the confirmed column. And then when the invoice is recorded, the purchase value using the order price is posted to the nominal, and any difference in the value between the order and the invoice price is posted to the currency adjustment nominal account that we chose within the settings. Okay, so I hope that has been informative and that you've enjoyed this morning's session. Next month we'll be looking at sales order processing settings and parameters, so we're hoping you can join us then as well. But until then, I hope you have a good weekend. And again, any questions that you have, please send them to me and I will get back to you all individually at the end of the morning. So thank you all for your time.